We also have Dan Perry, international affairs expert, joining us live from Tel Aviv. Sir, to what extent do you believe that the ultimatum is essentially off the table and President Trump and Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Iran have essentially called off all bets to attack energy infrastructure in Iran? What are your thoughts, sir, please?
The fact that, to a degree, Trump walked away from his ultimatum of 48 hours uh, suggests that perhaps his bluff was called, but also perhaps that the Gulf countries that clearly want this war to come to an end pressured him enough. It could also be a maneuver. It could be that in the next several days of talks, nothing will happen, and then the ultimatum comes back. Trump, I should think, wants the war to end, but he needs it to end in a way that doesn't look like Iran forced his hand by blocking the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. So, in your opinion, the victory there is that essentially, in my mind anyway, Trump may or may have not undermined Iran's military capabilities as far as a prolonged conflict is concerned. So, essentially, by Trump standing down, are you saying that he's essentially not giving in to Iran and trying to hold his own boat, so to speak? He's essentially trying to take the first step towards diplomacy or a victory. What do you really believe Trump's intentions are with this statement, if they are true, please?
Well, his intention is to walk away from the 48-hour ultimatum without appearing to have walked away. Uh, I do not know what's actually happening in the talks and whether Iran is showing any flexibility at all on the main issues at hand, the three that I mentioned: the nukes, the militias, and the missiles. I have no indication of it. That would involve Iran giving something beyond just the fact that they were thrashed militarily. I think Trump would like that. He's hoping to achieve some version of that in these upcoming talks. But I also suspect that even if that doesn't exactly happen, and all we really do is open the door to more prolonged talks without Iran having actually conceded anything, the U.S. will still declare victory because they'll say that they changed the regime by killing the entire leadership. And realistically, if you look at the physical damage done to Iran, there's no way rationally that they can be pleased, except that in the narrative of the Islamic Republic, if the West and Israel threw everything they had at them, and they somehow, despite everything, and despite the decapitation, and despite the ruination of much of their military, the regime is still standing, that constitutes victory. So, as you say, victory is a big deal for everyone. And we're currently at a situation where, weirdly, everyone can kind of claim it if the war ends. Although I do think that if the war ends with everyone claiming victory, but the regime still standing, that will be seen by many in the West and certainly in Israel as a missed opportunity. And if the regime is not only standing at the end of the war, but it emerges as strengthened and the protests don't resume and the domestic oppression continues apace, then that would be an outcome that is very demoralizing to the Iranian opposition and quite unfortunate to the Iranian people. My assumption, and I'm not in Iran, but I speak to Iranians, and I used to supervise the Middle East for AP, and that includes the Iran Bureau. My sense is the Iranian people would love to be rid of this regime because, like most terrible dictatorships, it is unloved.
Sir, let's discuss victory in a financial sense. I saw some reports earlier today that essentially pointed to Iran stating that for each ship that wasn't an enemy ship or vessel, rather, they had to pay $2 million to enter the Strait of Hormuz, which is an enormous amount. To what extent do you agree or disagree that this was the actual case and this is essentially what led to Trump backing down, so to speak, or essentially refraining from attacking Iran further and not fulfilling the ultimatum? What are your thoughts, sir, please?
I don't think Trump is afraid of a few $1,000,000, but he's afraid of any arrangement that looks like the U.S. was shaken down. Trump, or that the U.S. allowed the West or the world to be shaken down. Trump is very interested and not appearing to be a loser. He very much wants to be a winner. His worldview is, I think, somewhat binary that way. Again, he's such a strange person that I tend to shy away from predicting anything he's going to do. But I think what I just said is fairly incontrovertible and obviously true. Uh, so yeah, Iran blackmailing the world into paying it to allow ships to go through is not going to fly, and that's not a financial matter. It's a matter of principle. The Strait of Hormuz has, for many centuries, well before the Islamic Republic existed or the U.S. existed, has been a choke point for the global economy. It's very simple. It's the shortest route by sea and then land from the east to Europe, and whoever controlled it in the past had the possibility of trying to engage in such shakedowns, which is why empires of all kinds have sought to control it. At this point, for Iran to try to play that card too dramatically is a casus belli for the rest of the world. It won't fly, and I'm not surprised it didn't.
Mr. Perry, we essentially heard our last guest or prior guest just now discuss how we just have to wait and see. And he also discussed that this is essentially a 5-day halt. But of course, attacks can come at any time. To what extent do you believe that the attacks might be surprise attacks again in maybe 3 days, or will they resume after 5 days? And of course, I wish we had some intel as to which side is essentially telling the truth. But here on NewsX World, we will get to the bottom of it. Please tell us more, please.
I think you're very optimistic. To what extent do I think it's all lies? To a considerable extent.
Mr. Perry, I essentially heard some reports that Saudi Arabia was also going to step in. Now we've also heard news that essentially Turkey might help in mediating the Middle East conflict. Will Saudi Arabia also be able to tamper down the rising tension? If not now, then maybe in 5 days. What are your thoughts, sir, please?
His own position is not entirely clear and probably not truthful publicly. You really don't know if they're in favor of the war or against him. They certainly don't want a prolonged war that rattles oil markets and impedes the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz and makes life difficult for everyone in their markets, basically. That's clear. I hear the talk about how the world doesn't need this war and how everyone should sit around a table. And on one hand, of course, that's true. The Saudis and the Turks and the Omanis and the Europeans and most people of good faith around the world don't want war, clearly. But I'll tell you what, most people in the region in the Middle East don't want business as usual either from the Islamic Republic of Iran. The malicious project in particular is completely unacceptable and a total outrage, illegitimate and illegal. It's an interference in all these countries' sovereignty. The Iranian nuclear program is a menace to the planet and also to the UK and London, where Mr. Vaz sits. I don't think it's so simple as to just call on everyone to sit around a table, because the Iranians famously obfuscate around a table. They draw out negotiations forever, and they don't have interest in backing down. So the idea that that needs to be backed by force, and that at times when you're dealing with such a player, force is necessary, whether or not it can be rendered legitimate through the procedures at the United Nations, is not false. So you can hate war, as I certainly do, but understand that sometimes one deals with players around the world that will not budge unless you threaten force, and sometimes use it. Now, does this mean that you use only force? That at no point do you deploy a diplomatic arm as well? Of course not. I would welcome talks with Iran and perhaps a pause in the war to see if now, having been thrashed militarily, they are more acquiescent. But I would not like to see those talks return to the psychological status quo ante to the dynamic that was before, where the Iranians thought that they had leverage and all the time in the world, and they were indifferent to the desires of the world and of the region, that they stopped meddling with their neighbors.
Sir, essentially with this development, and of course understanding that Iran has given a firm warning, let's discuss this further. Of course, this is the Iranian embassy in Kabul now. So does this validate everything that we've been discussing? What are your thoughts, sir, please?
My thoughts are that there may be a leadership vacuum in Iran because of all the assassinations of key leaders, and we really don't know if they're capable of speaking with one voice. If this is the Iranian voice, if the report we saw earlier and now the claims coming out of the Iranian embassy in Afghanistan represent the Iranian position, then that's rather brave because they're making Trump look ridiculous. And to quote The Godfather, a man in Trump's position cannot afford to look ridiculous. He may lash out in great anger. If Iran's position is that Trump is lying and there haven't been talks, and this is pure and simple, backing down from his ultimatum, that would leave him rather shamefaced, and he may double down on not just his threats but his actual actions. Again, to restate, I cannot predict what Trump is going to do, but the Iranian statements of the past half hour do amount to a refutation of the Trump statement on Truth Social that there are good talks going on that might justify a suspension of the ultimatum. It makes it look like Trump backed down. I agree that much of the world has an interest in this not continuing, but as I said before, the region does not have an interest in Iran emerging strengthened. And as for Russia, of course, their interest is weirdly dual. I think they don't mind America acting on its own as a world power that doesn't ask for permission and that believes that might is right, because that tends to validate their own actions in Ukraine from their perspective. On the other hand, they don't want to see the Islamic Republic brought to its knees, because the Islamic Republic is, of course, an ally of Russia and a supplier of various weaponry, in particular drones.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Perry. We'll speak soon when we have more developments. Much appreciated. Now we have more breaking